right, sorry for the delay. Sorry for the hiccup. Well, that allowed our new visitors to join us and not miss anything. So that's great. Hi guys, thank you for coming. So we have, as I was saying, we have, as you can see from your agenda, we'll have 5 brief talks, power talks of 10 to 15 minutes, each one with a different topic, and each talk taking a different perspective and a different look at this whole idea of body image and social media, or how the two of them fit together. And my idea for this talk was, to talk about change. Because all of today actually will be talking about change, right? And I'm the social scientist, and so I wanted to talk today not just about change, but about some social science theories of change that actually make us think about that in a deeper and more holistic way, and at the end of the day should help us move this change forward in a better way. So today in particular, I think we'll end up talking at least about one of these things. We'll be talking about changes in how we perceive our bodies, or how we talk about our bodies, or how we talk about ourselves, right? How we think about ourselves, how we behave on social media, how others behave on social media. Sometimes that's the problem, we're all fine. Others are the problem, right? Or how much, or maybe we want to change and we'll end up talking about changes in how much social media affects our lives. Or there could be a number of other changes that we want to talk about or that we want to affect in ourselves and others. But the big question here is, how does change actually happen, right? That's the big question. We all want to change ourselves, sometimes we want to change others. How does that actually work? Well, from a social scientific perspective, there's quite a few ways in which change can happen. And you first start with, the first thing you have to think about is, are you looking at change from an individual perspective, one person, and the change they can do to their own behavior, their own attitudes, or are you looking at change on a societal level? So how, the majority of young people in Glasgow can change their attitudes, or how smokers can smoke less, or people who drink can drink less, and so on and so forth. Any range of health behavior change. So I'm going to touch a little bit on each of these different levels, because what you do on an individual level is different from what you would do on a societal level to affect change. And so, as I said, I'm going to very briefly touch on a few social science theories that I think will help us all think about change in a better way, in a more theoretical way, which I'm a firm believer that theory can very often lead to better practice. This is what I study, and this is what I preach, and I very much believe in a better integration of the two, of theory and practice. So I'll bring you my theory, and then you'll put it into practice here. So when we talk about change on the individual level, one of the most common things that we start with is the right attitude. Unless you have the right attitude about change, you're not gonna do anything, right? Unless you have a positive attitude towards something, you're not gonna take it up as a new behavior, right? So having the right attitude is one of the first things. But that in itself is not enough. Very often, a very important factor is actually the social norm of those around us, okay? So we're all social animals, and very often the behaviors we engage in are actually social behaviors. So we very often do what our friends do. We very often change a behavior if our group of closest friends also changes a behavior. And I have to admit, even I myself started running a few years ago because the neighbor started running. And I figured, well, I can run, why not me try it? And then my husband started running, and soon we were a group of people running from the neighborhood, okay? And so behavior change is actually contagious. And this is why very often when health professionals try to affect change, they don't just go at each and every person. That's why you often talk about running buddies or quit smoking buddies, or some other way in which you engage groups of people together to do something. That way they're more successful. But you also, and most importantly, you also need this concept of self-efficacy. So you cannot be successful in changing your behavior unless you actually believe that you can be successful, okay? So believing that you can do it is actually half the battle, okay? Because otherwise, theory shows us, this theory of planned behavior, that you won't even try something unless you believe that you can actually do it, okay? So 3 very important concepts, and I think these are things that we can think about as well as we talk about the changes that we want to see on the topics that we're discussing. But change is not an event, all right? You don't just wake up one day and oops, you've changed. You're now going to eat your 5-a-day veggies and life is going to be grand, right? Change is a process, okay? And this is where lots of if you fail to understand this part, you're going to struggle in affecting change in others. Change is a process, and it's sometimes a very long and troublesome process. And this is the actual process, okay? This is a very interesting theory that's been around for decades. It's called the stages of change model. And it shows change as a 6-stage process, okay? And so what this means is that for people to change, they all of them enter this process from this stage of where they're unaware but happy about their ignorance, right? Ignorance is bliss, as they say. This is the first stage of this model. You're a smoker, but you're happy being a smoker. You don't really care to quit, and that's your state. You have no intent of changing anything. But little by little, you start thinking about things. You start being aware of the health problems of smoking, for example. You start being aware that, the short-term, the long-term implications of smoking. But you still don't have a clear intent of, that you're going to quit in a certain time frame, okay? But as you move on, you start preparing yourself. Things are festering in your mind. This is this whole idea of things are festering in your mind. They're chipping away at you, and little by little, the change is chipping away at you. And this is also this idea even of social media. We won't change people all of a sudden overnight. But little by little, by talking about this, there's a certain level of, little by little, we move the ball forwards, okay? We move people forwards towards the level of preparing to change, where they already do have an intent to take action and to address the problem, and the actual actions. So see, action is stage 4 of this. How much work is needed for someone to change on an individual level before they even attempt the change? All these things and all these processes that are happening in their heads before that. And then you go to this next stage, which is maintenance, which is often seen as this kind of low and kind of a dead stage where nothing happens. But this is actually the most important stage, because this is the active process of maintaining the change. Because if you don't maintain the change, you're going to go back, right? You're going to relapse. And very often this is what happens the last stage. And so this is not even a process that many people go through this process several times. So for example, for quitting smoking, many smokers have several attempts until they go into full maintenance of where they're smoke-free for good. Okay, but when you relapse, you can maybe go to a previous stage and not go back. You're never going to go back to the stage where you think there's no problem. You already know there's a problem, okay? So even if people are struggling and fighting and relapsing, they still are getting closer and closer to a solution, most people, all right? So I wanted to share this model because, again, I think it's going to help us to think about this idea of change as a process, as a longitudinal thing that happens over time. So even if we come up with these great ideas, which I'm sure you will in the next 2 hours, of how to change social media and make it a great place, and it doesn't happen in the next month, don't get discouraged, okay? This is a long and tiresome process, and it's taken us a long time to get to this stage, so it's gonna take us a long time as well to dig out of it. Now, going up a level to the individual level, okay? So all of you as individuals, you often, to change your behavior, go through these processes. But us as a group, things there are a little bit different. And things there often, the approaches there are a little bit different. They often involve these top-down approaches, such as government policy that we heard about earlier, legislation, so say the laws on minimum unit pricing, is a legislation that is encouraging change, right, for people to reduce drinking. Laws on sugar tax, if that gets approved, that's also an example of top-down societal level change, okay? So governments very often engage in that. Very often that goes hand in hand with campaigns, right? So we're going to do a new law, but we're also going to roll out a campaign that kind of talks to people and encourages them to do their own personal thinking on the side. Or various incentives, various initiatives, and so on and so forth. Okay. But the important thing here that we need to think about is how does change actually spread to society, okay? So again, this is a very interesting process, and the final theory that I'm gonna throw at you today, which again talks about this gradual spread of change over time. And this is, maybe some of you have seen this. How many of you have seen this graph before? Okay, excellent. So I'm talking to the right people here that haven't seen it before. This graph is based on the diffusion of innovation theory by Everett Rogers. He was a rural sociologist in Iowa back in the 60s, and he actually first developed this theory because he wanted to see how Iowa farmers are adopting this new pesticide for protecting their corn. But since then, it has been used for all types of new innovations. So this is also called adoption of innovation. So when we talk about, and innovation is change, right? This is what we're also trying to do here. We're trying to be innovative. We're trying to propose these new ideas. So when you talk about adoption of innovation, you could be talking about some sort of service. You could be talking about products. You could be talking about ideas or behaviors, okay? So any of that is innovation. So buckling your baby in a car seat was an innovation 30 years ago, right? And that spread following the same model. Most innovations happen in this way on a societal level, okay? So what this tells us, what this little graph tells us, is that first of all, we have this tiny minority here, the innovators, who are, they have their eye on the new things that are happening. And the thing is, the innovators are different. If you're talking about the new iPhone or technology, there will be one group of people will be the innovators. If you're talking about social justice issues or ideas or health behaviors, another group of people will be the innovators, okay? So they're not the same people for every idea and every product, but for every idea and every product, there is this group of people, these 2.5%, roughly 3%, that are the innovators, and they are the first ones to jump on something. They often are the ones that are looking out for these ideas and are the very first that they take them. They just have a knack for these things. The very important, probably the most important group here is the next one, the early adopters, okay? This is the group, these are the opinion leaders, okay? This is the group of people in society that is also open to change, but they're also innovators, but they're also people that can influence others, okay? This is what opinion leaders do. They form their own opinion in a way that's informed, but they're also able to influence other people's opinions, okay? And so for an innovation to take hold and to really kick forward, this is the tipping point. If you get those early adopters, and if you get, these 16% up there, the innovators and the early adopters, the innovation afterwards, this new idea starts a life on its own and can go over this hump easily. And this is the early majority, the people that's the mainstream. This hump is the mainstream, okay? And if those opinion leaders get on board with an idea, the mainstream can be conquered, all right? You are the innovators in this room, okay? You're these early adopters and the opinion leaders who have recognized that this issue that we're talking about is worth talking about, is worth making a change, and you've selected to come here and spend your time and brainstorm about it, okay? So whether we're still at a tipping point with this, probably not there yet, since we do need these events and we're still trying to find a way forward. But I'm very hopeful that with all of you here and with other such events hopefully going on across the country, we actually can get to this tipping point sooner rather than later. And then there'll always be laggards in the end. There'll always be people that are not convinced, that don't think that a certain idea is for them, or think it's not the smartest idea in the world, and that's fine. You can't win them all. But if you win the majority, your idea is accepted, okay? So what does all this have to do with positive body image and healthy social media? How do we bring it back to what we're talking about today? Well, lots of these ideas are already out there on social media, right? On Instagram, on Twitter, you're probably following or have seen lots of these ladies on social media, have laughed at Celeste Barber's, jokes and, caricatures of, of unrealistic body image. If you haven't, please do. Actually, some research came out just a few months ago saying that this actually can improve your body image. There's already evidence behind that. So do seek her out and enjoy. The grassroots movement is already happening, as you already know. It has been gaining momentum for the past few years. And I think events like this where people actually get together and take this on and try to brainstorm actual strategies to reach that tipping point will be key for moving it forward. Events like this positive body image movement has been around even before social media, but it's been difficult with only the use of traditional media, which is, again, a very top-down approach to get a mass following. Social media has brought us, as we'll talk about later, this negativity a little bit to everyone, but it's also giving us a chance to bring this change to everyone as well. So that actually is invigorating this whole positive body image movement to a much greater extent. And so I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Thanks to all you opinion leaders and early adopters for being here. And I hope that we move all these ideas forward in the next few hours. Thank you.